I would like to call the February 24th, 2021 City Council meeting to order. Will everyone please rise and join with me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Pamela Parker,
Excuse me, Mayor Whitney. I'm not able to hear anything.
I apologize, is that better?
Thank you.
Yes. Councilmember Pamela Parker,
Here.
Carey.
Present.
Chilson,
Present.
Lisa Parker,
Present.
Hutchings,
Here.
Ruffridge.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the approval of agenda and consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda and consent agenda? Ms. Hutchings.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda and consent agenda as presented.
Okay. Second, please.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Ruffridge. Are there any changes to the agenda or consent agenda? Would the clerk please read the consent agenda?
Approval of the February 10th, 2021 council meeting minutes. New business other, action memorandum 2021-002, request for an excused absence from the March 10th, 2021 regular city council meeting by council member Lisa Parker. And that is your consent agenda.
Are there any public comments on any of the items just read by the clerk? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. I see no one, and I see no one on the Zoom. Having no one else wishing to speak to the approval of the agenda and consent agenda, it's back before the council. Are there any council objections to approving the agenda and consent agenda? Hearing none, the agenda and consent agenda are approved. Moving on to item 4, presentation with prior notice, comprehensive economic development strategy, community outreach and engagement by Tim Dillon, Executive Director of the Kenai Peninsula Economic Development District. Mr. Dillon.
Thank you very much for allowing me to present to you all tonight. First of all, before I wind up getting texts from your council members and others, yes, I do have a flowery kind of shirt on today. I'm actually in my southern office. As we all have learned, you can work from any place in the world these days as long as you have an iPad or some way for communication. Shelley, I believe we can put up the presentation now. I think my office, I think Abby in Kenai has got it loaded. Perfect. Well, again, as I said, thank you so much for letting me present to you. You know, we've been trying to do this quarterly, at least quarterly. We've got a lot of different things going on, but the main thing I wanted to talk to you now about is our comprehensive economic development strategy. Next slide, please. As you all know, the folks here at CAPED, we're not just responsible for Kenai and Soldotna. And over the last 5 years, we've stressed that this is what the Kenai Peninsula Borough map looks like. And I just want to bring it up again so that you can see who we are as far as the area that we cover. Next slide, please. Reminding you again that we are a private non-government resource. We try and assist in a variety of ways. And I think one of the reasons we've been successful is because, number one, we're not part of government. So I don't have to notice a meeting or wait X number of days. And on top of that, we don't have members. So I have an awesome 15-member board that I report to, and we're able to look at things from the 30,000-foot view and really be able to take action, when it's appropriate. Next slide, please. You all know, because you've got an awesome city manager there that spent time as a planner, so I'm sure you guys know, a comprehensive economic development strategy is key, whether it be with a city, a borough, or an organization like us to, more than anything else, help get people on the same page. But the key thing is it opens federal funding opportunities. It allows you to apply for different kinds of grants and opportunities when it comes to funding. And whether it be now or other times, that's really key, is being able to capitalize and look at those opportunities. Next slide, please. We've been working since July 1 on our planning and outreach efforts. We have been talking to folks, and more than anything else, listening to folks all over the peninsula. Whether you're talking about the folks in Seward or Lowell Point or Hope, Tyonek, the variety of Native organizations, or our communities right there in the Central Peninsula, we've been listening to people and having a variety of different opportunities for them to reach out. Next slide. You will see that from a presentation and engagement look, we've been doing this since July 1 to try and get people's input. Currently, and I believe John from your staff, Stephanie and Shannon over with the chamber, they've been helping us get out our surveys. We have a business survey and a resident survey that we're looking at getting some additional information. And I'll talk here in a couple of minutes about what we're finding, but we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to see themselves in the plan. It's not, when it comes to a plan like this, the goal isn't to, wade in the weeds. It's to look at the bigger picture and how do you go ahead and fit things underneath. So if you go to the next slide, please. We've had great participation so far with our different sampling, whether it be our major industries, our business groups, again, our chambers, public forums. We actually, in the first week in January, we actually had a Zoom meeting. We had 83 people from across the peninsula participate. I was shocked, to be honest with you. I was so pleased. It was outstanding. But it's giving us the information that we need from all these industries to make sure that as we're planning, we're moving forward in the correct way. Next. One of the first things that you do, next slide, please. The first thing that you do is you do a SWOT analysis. And we're all familiar with this. And we, as I said, we started it in July. Key thing was back in October, we took 2 days in October where we brought our entire board in for 2 days. We did a complete retreat where we walked through everything because, as most of you all know, you have to change with the times. And this April 1 will mean I just finished my 5th year. And one of the big things is we've changed, and I wanted to make sure our board knew what we were doing and what we weren't doing. And then we looked into the future, and we had the Center for Economic Development assist us as we looked at things and saw where we were and where we go forward. Next slide. So there's a variety of these, and as we move from one slide to the next, we were able to garner information like the strengths. Next slide. The weaknesses. Next slide. The opportunities. Next slide. The threats. So you can see there's a variety of different things, and the larger the letters are on the different words, the more times we heard the same thing. So then if you go to the next slide, you'll see then we were able to get specifics about identified strengths. And it's key not only during the meeting, but then making sure that on average in a regular meeting, I'm getting between 6 and 13, 14 emails after that presentation from folks giving us additional information. For example, these are all specifics. Next slide, and those were on our strengths. These are some of our weaknesses. Next slide. These are some of our opportunities. And again, it gives people to feel like they're part of it because they are part of it, and that we're listening to them. Next slide. And these are the opportunities. So you take all these pieces and you try and figure out, okay, what do we do from here? Here are all the different threats that people feel. Next slide. You take all those together, and what we've decided on is, and this has been through literally thousands of people we've listened to, our overarching SEDS goal for the next 5 years, again, is going to be quality of living and quality of place. And that includes, and the number one thing we're working on is continuing to develop the Kenai Peninsula brand. And that's not only for our residents and visitors, but our businesses and anybody that wants to look at us from a recreational opportunity. So if you think about the overarching goal being quality of living, then next slide, we have 5 individual goals. And all the different projects we're talking to people about and helping people with should fit under these 5. Technology and communications, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Workforce and human capital. If you haven't seen the new website that we unveiled last Wednesday at the Joint Chamber Luncheon, boy, you need to spend some time on it. It's Kenai Peninsula Workforce.org. I've gotten calls from all over the state, not only from workforce development kinds of people, the governor's office, different commissioners, wanting to know how we put this together and how many hundreds of thousands of dollars it cost us to do. And I'm going to tell you right now, it was 5 figures to the left of the decimal point. It was not 6. So I can tell you, it's an outstanding resource, again, with the understanding that if a job opens up on the Kenai Peninsula, I want somebody to be trained properly, and I want them to have the first opportunity to get that job. We're also looking at infrastructure and land use, business climate and entrepreneurship, and regional partnerships. And I'm sure it wouldn't take much for you all to come up with all those things and how we're putting those things together and your projects, how they would fit underneath there. Next slide, please. As far as our timeline, you can see we're well into things. We're in the public engagement and outreach and stakeholder engagement. We've done a lot of these kinds of presentations and also longer ones where I'd have an hour to be able to talk and discuss things. We've talked to our folks from Chugach, which, that's Port Graham, Nanwalek, Seward, just a lot of different people to get their input, along with our tourism folks, our retail folks, all those different pieces. And as you can see, our final submission date will be June 30th. Next slide, please. Why do you have a SEDS? Well, let's remember we had a 7.0 earthquake, and then we had the Peninsula fires, and now we have the pandemic. So when you start looking at federal dollars, you have to have a SEDS online and in place. We actually have played a big role that most people don't know about on the whole earthquake situation, because the only places you could spend the money was Kenai, Anchorage, and the Valley. Unfortunately, the Valley does not have an economic development plan, strategy, or staff. Anchorage has those, but they didn't have a plan in place. We're the only ones that had a plan in place. So we've actually helped folks like John Moosey, the borough the borough manager, and some of the mayors and things, help to make sure they could get those federal dollars. Next, broadband is huge for all of us. And in order for us to continue to move forward, we have to make sure that we get done what we need to do when it comes to broadband. You probably saw in the paper on Monday some things going on about some different technologies and all. My office has been engaged not only with the governor's office, but on the federal side with Commerce, the Denali Commission, USDA, and we're going to make sure that here in the next 2 years, the concept is if you have a community of 25 people or more, we're going to make sure that you're tied in broadband-wise. Next slide, please. We're also trying to figure out how do we help with some of these different challenges on the peninsula. We're very, very pleased, not with the fact that we have erosion, but, you've got erosion, whether it be in Kenai, Soldotna, Homer, Seward, all these places. We've been working with a scientist from the lower 48, plus Launch Alaska, and we're very pleased that we're going to be used in Homer as a test site for a new product that's been used in the lower 48 and especially some of the warmer climates to try and prevent erosion. So that's a really cool thing we've got going on. Next slide. As you can see with your capital improvement plan for the next 5 years, any one of those things that you've got on your list already, there's a way to take those and put them under our SEDS. And again, when we write a letter of recommendation, when we get the phone call, and most of the time, somebody like Stephanie knows and Kyle knows, but we get phone calls from all the federal agencies, and they call us and they say, hey, what do you think about this project? What's the downside to this? What's the upside to this? So for us to be able to put that in, that helps a lot. Next slide, please. What can you do to help? Letting me speak and Shelley not gonging me, so we can go ahead and present. Make sure people participate in the surveys. I know John and Shannon have made sure that the city website and the Chamber of Commerce have an opportunity for people to go ahead and participate in those surveys, and just encourage people in your community to participate in the surveys. Next, please. We all need to remember, though, I constantly get told, well, we're different. We have to be different. We have to be called out in your SEDS. You know what? You have to remember, we're all different, but we're all the same. We're all dealing with the same issues. One person's boat might be a little bit different than another, but we're all going to make sure that we all work together on this. Next slide, please. And don't forget the bigger picture. Sometimes you're so close because of your role with the council or a community member that all you care about is what's going on your street. Make sure you take a step back and you're able to see the bigger picture and how all this fits in. Because again, the Kenai Peninsula, as long as we're able to take care of everybody, and that's one of those things that we're all going to be okay. You look at between March 1st and the end of December, we were able to help bring $197.5 million to the Kenai Peninsula. When you start looking at Alaska Cares, the municipal cares money that went strictly to businesses, EIDL and PPP. Let's not forget what we probably would be looking like right now if we didn't get almost $200 million. So let's look at the big picture and make sure our neighbors are taken care of. Next. Again, let's remember, we are the size of the state of West Virginia. We might only have 58,000 people, but we are the size of the state of West Virginia. So let's use the resources. Let's use them properly. We will be more than happy to take comments, concerns, ideas. We've got lots of other programs we're in the middle of. As I mentioned, we've got the Kenai Peninsula workforce site that we just started. We're in the middle of shooting a video. We're doing a 6 to 8 minute video on manufacturing that's going to highlight different organizations on the Kenai Peninsula and show people that, hey, we're open for business. Bring your ideas, bring your family, come live on the Kenai Peninsula, and we'll help make sure that you get it done. Next slide. Thank you all very much for giving me the time. You have my email address, you have my phone number. I'd be more than happy to answer your questions, but more than anything else, if your community or any of the members of the council or the staff have questions, concerns, please email me or call me, and I'd be more than happy to help. And thank you, Abby and Caitlin back in Kenai, in snowy Kenai, for changing my slides. I really appreciate it. I've got an awesome, awesome staff. And you folks in Soldotna need to know that Abby Dial, who is a 17-year-old, she's a senior in high school over in Soldotna. She's finishing up her high school diploma this May, her associate's degree, plus she works for us 30-some hours a week. And she is the future of Soldotna and the Central Peninsula. So we're just so blessed to have her along with my other 2 staff members. So be more than happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dillon. Are there any questions or comments from the council? Seeing none, thank you again, Mr. Dillon, and enjoy your vacation wherever you're at.
I wish it was a vacation.
All righty.
Thank you.
Moving on, the next item on the agenda is number 5, public comments and presentations. Items other than those appearing on the agenda, 3 minutes per speaker, 20 minutes aggregate. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on any item not appearing on the agenda? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. app users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. I see no hands raised, so we'll move right along from public comments to item 6 on the agenda, Assembly Legislative Report. Are there any representatives from the borough or state in attendance who would like to speak? And I see no one here or any hands raised. Moving on to number 7, public hearings, testimony limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Ordinance 2021-003, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $90,000 in the utility fund and the utility system capital improvements fund for the wastewater treatment plant screw press design project, introduced by the city manager. May I have a motion to enact? Mr. Carey.
Thank you. I move the adoption of ordinance 2021-003.
The second, please.
Second.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Parker. Report from the administration.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's typical for us to bring utility projects to the council as mid-year appropriations throughout the year, and this one would allow for the design of the next large project that we hope to endeavor at the wastewater treatment plant, which is to replace our very aging and increasingly expensive to upkeep belt press. Dewatering our sludge is one of the very last steps in the process. We want to get as much water out of it as possible before we take it to the landfill. And the press that we have is less efficient than more current modern technologies. So our wastewater treatment plant master plan actually recognized this issue of dewatering, that piece of technology we have was at the end of its useful life, and that it recommended we explore alternatives if and when we replace that piece of equipment. I want to welcome and introduce Nathan McCombs. He's our utility manager who joined us this last fall and has been with us for about 6 months. I know Mr. McCombs will be happy to answer any questions the council have about the process or the need operationally for this new equipment. But essentially, this ordinance would appropriate the funding for us to be able to do the design work, to recognize whether there's any facility improvements that can be accomplished in association with that new equipment if we were to purchase it. And the memo in the packet has some early estimates of price figures for the equipment, but we would expect through the design process to get a much more dialed in analysis of the anticipated project costs. So this would only be to appropriate for the design, do the additional cost estimating work, and we seek the council's consideration. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. The public hearing is now open. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. I see no one in the chambers, and I see no hands raised on Zoom. So we'll close the public hearing at this time. No one wishing to speak. The item is back before the council. Are there any council comments? Seeing none, call for the roll.
Councilmember Pamela Parker,
Yes.
Carey,
Yes.
Chilson,
Yes.
Lisa Parker,
Yes.
Hutchings,
Yes.
Rufford.
Yes.
You have 6 yes votes.
Thank you. The ordinance 2021-003 passes 6-0. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, ordinance 2021-004, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $17,000 in the general fund for the City Hall generator automatic transfer switch project, introduced by the city manager. May I have a motion to enact?
I'll move to enact ordinance 2021-004.
Thank you, Mr. Chilson.
And I'll
Ms.
second.
Hutchings? Thank you for the second, Ms. Hutchings. A report from the administration.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Several years ago, the city purchased a backup emergency generator that's located just outside the staff entrance here at City Hall. But it currently has a manual switch that requires someone who knows how. Currently, I think Kyle, Scotty, a few other employees know how to turn that on if we were to lose power to actually engage the generator. And we're bringing forward this request for an additional $17,000, which would allow us to hire someone to install an automatic switch so that that would happen automatically. That's particularly important outside of normal business hours, especially because so much of our IT infrastructure lives here in this building, including components that are necessary for things like SPD phone lines, for example. So if we weren't able to have someone get here in time for the battery backup for some of those systems, potentially we could have challenges with city facilities even outside of this building from an IT perspective. So we seek your approval in potentially appropriating these funds so that we could go out to bid competitively and hire a contractor to install that automated emergency backup switch. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. The public hearing is now open. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. I see no one in the chambers, and looking at the attendees on Zoom, I see no hands raised. So we'll close the public hearing, and the item is back before the council. Are there any council comments?
Just
Vice Mayor Parker.
Just a quick question. Am I correct in assuming that the city's data center is located here in City Hall for all their existing IT infrastructure? Okay, it's pretty critical that that be backed up by generator, and there's additional damages that can go with equipment like that or recovering data should that crash. So I'm fully supportive of putting a automatic transfer switch to keep that stuff running, because again, that affects the entire city operations, I'm assuming.
That's correct. In the basement, we've got a cooling system and our data center. With our tower, we're able to back up and connect to SPD, but the main data center is here. We do have battery backups, but as noted in the memo, there's about a 30-minute run time before those start to fail on us. So in addition to SPD, there's utility SCADA systems monitoring our lift stations and components at the wastewater treatment plant, among other communication type transfers. So,
Vice Mayor Parker, did you have your hand raised?
I did, and I'm going to support this. I had a backup generator installed at my house a number of years ago, and it has an automatic switch on it, and so when the power goes out, within seconds, boom, it's on, and the only way you know your power's gone out is, the only thing that doesn't revert back is your clocks. So your clocks flash. So, if the power goes out and I'm out of town, my house is safe. So it's a good move.
Any other council comments? Seeing none, call for the vote.
Councilmember Pamela Parker,
Yes.
Carey,
Yes.
Tilson,
Yes.
Lisa Parker,
Yes.
Hutchings,
Yes.
Ruffridge.
Yes.
You have 6 yes votes.
Ordinance 2021-004 passes 6-0. Moving on to item number 8 on the agenda, new business. Ordinances, there are none to be introduced tonight. Item B is resolutions. Resolution 2021-009, updating the Soldotna Regional Sports Complex COVID-19 protocols to increase spectator capacity to 750 and authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with the Kenai River Brown Bears for the remainder of the 2021 hockey season, introduced by the mayor. May I have a motion to adopt?
I'll make a motion to adopt Resolution 2021-009.
Thank you,
Second.
Ms. Hutchings.
Second.
A second?
Second.
Second by Vice Mayor Parker. My report on this is the Brown Bears would like to come home. Brown Bears are our local team. The community reached out here a year or so ago when they were in need of some financial help, and the community supports them completely. It was a great outpouring, and now they want to come home, finish the season here, hopefully continue on into the postseason. And I think the community is ready to see this kind of activity again, be able to get out as a group, as a family, as our young kids, the teenagers that can go to a hockey game and watch it and enjoy themselves. And I think we're ready for this, and I think we need it just to help people get through the rest of the winter. With that, I will ask the administration to fill in the details.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to point out 2 additional laydown items that came after the packet. One was a request for additional information about the tentative schedule in terms of when those games would land in March, April, and potentially into May. And then the second item is one that Mr. Carmichael coordinated. He received a letter from the Parks and Recreation Superintendent at the Fairbanks North Star Borough, which is where Alaska's other junior hockey team calls their home turf, talking about what the Fairbanks North Star Borough is considering for their COVID-19 protocols at the Big Dipper Ice Arena up there in Fairbanks. So I wanted to point out those 2 laydown items. Other than that, I think that concludes my report, other than to recognize we've got Mr. Carmichael here tonight if there are any specific questions about SRSC operations, and also Mr. Nate Keel, who's a representative of the Brown Bears organization, is with us in the chambers tonight as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Anyone in the audience here would like to speak? Please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, Nate Keel. Address is 404 Loudon Kenai. I'm the president of the Brown Bears and wanted to come and just thank you for everything that you've done in trying to do everything possible as we battle through the pandemic here, not just for the Bears, but just in general across the city and across the Central Peninsula to try to safely allow our residents to engage in activities and whatnot. So I can't imagine what a challenge it's been for you, but I thank you on behalf of the organization and thank Mr. Carmichael for a lot of hard work and due diligence as well in working with us to try to come up with ideas on how this can work. For us, going back to September when I think I first took part in a work session, it's really just about being sustainable and feasible for the organization. Our goals have always been to, over the years, to try to hit 1,000 people on average at the Sports Center. It's always been a challenge, but it's continued to grow. Last year, I think we were 976 on average attendance, and so we're getting there. We're very close, and it's just we rely on the games financially, obviously, to be able to keep the organization in the black and whatnot. But in regards to this particular resolution, I thank the mayor for bringing this forward for consideration. For us, we were asked before what the absolute minimum number was, and it needs to be 1,000 or more. But we said 750. We feel that we can do it for 750. We have a lot of activities and fundraisers that take place also during the games and intermission breaks and whatnot. And by having those folks in the stands to help us, we're able to raise funds and revenues and whatnot. So it goes even beyond just ticket sales in terms of that. The benefit to the community, I don't want to belabor that and get too much into that, but obviously I think it goes without saying after 14 years, we're still here. We are the 3rd oldest team in the North American Hockey League of 28 teams across the nation. We're the little team that could, and I say that proudly on behalf of the organization. We've got some great folks that work with us and have helped us over the years. Both our members of our organization and our sponsors, and of course the community that just continues to embrace the team and whatnot. And so for us, we want to come home. We've got a great group, a great staff this year, and our general manager has worked overtime to try to keep the pins in the air down there as we have played in different rinks and kind of operated, if you will, in more of a centralized bus type division, if you will, keeping expenses down, staying in dorms or with billets and whatnot down there as we've played our season and really have done quite well. And I was just down there a few days ago in Minneapolis watching the team and spending time, and it's just a phenomenal group. So they're excited. Obviously, they all want to come back. We want them back. And it's just a matter of if we can get this, we feel that number of 750 we can make it work, and we can bring the team back for, I think it's up to 14 regular season games plus playoffs, which it would seem that we're on track for. Am I out of time? I apologize. I don't really know how you're.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any questions from the council? Seeing none? Oh, Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, sir, for coming
Yes.
tonight. And I did speak yesterday with Chris Hedlund, and
Good.
the one question I asked him, he wasn't able to answer, but you did tonight, and that was your average attendance in 2019. I didn't ask for 2020 because
Oh, okay.
2020 is blurry for all of us. So if we approve 750, if your average attendance is 976, what are you going to do if you get over 750?
My understanding is we couldn't allow more than 750 in the arena, right? Is that the question? Yeah, we're going to have to come up with strategies and whatnot, and working with the sports center, and trying to identify which I think we already know where all the different exits and doors and everything are, and trying to come up with a good plan to really make sure that we're doing a head count everywhere where they're coming in, doors are locked, so that people aren't sneaking in and whatnot, to keep that number at 750 or under, if I understand the resolution.
Follow up, if I might.
Yes.
So your ticket sales, are those going to happen beforehand? Do I have to have a ticket to, I don't go to hockey games very often. So are you going to do a pre-sale on tickets, or can I show up at the door and buy a ticket?
That's a great question, and it's one that we just discussed, Mr. Hedlund and myself, today, in terms of how we would approach that. We typically, in a normal year, would offer pre-sold tickets, season pass tickets, 10 packs and 6 packs and whatnot of tickets, as well as tickets on game night. With a cap of 750, I would anticipate that and as we go through some mitigation here, trying to make sure we've got this dialed in, what I would suggest is that a majority of it be done by pre-sale. We do have the ability to do that, and we have our own outlet where we have our own Bears Den, where people can pre-order and then pick up their tickets, and that just in a normal year helps us a great deal. If we have 1,000 fans and 500 come in with their season passes or their pre-bought tickets, it definitely keeps down the traffic at the front door. And our goal in this case would be to definitely even probably amplify that, so that we have a large number pre-purchased, so that we don't have the crowds of people and whatnot. I think that's where you were probably going with that, to maintain distancing and all the things that we want to accomplish.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Rufford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for coming tonight. Just a couple of questions for you. First, what sort of mitigation practices are being used where you're currently playing? It sounds like there's a variety of things. Are you playing in any arenas currently with this number of fans?
We are not for our home games, because we're playing our home games in a couple different arenas down there. For instance, where I was just at, I don't know if we had 100 people or so, but because we only have just the billet families of the kids, or maybe their parents coming to games, playing down around Minneapolis. So the question being, I'm sorry.
What is the? Do you have that? Do you have 750 fans?
Yeah,
in
at some other arenas, yes, we have, as we've traveled around out to the Dakotas and different places and whatnot. There are states, obviously, that are more open than others, and we've had some teams in our league having to have crossed over, and even us at one point having to practice in Wisconsin, or schedule some games over in North Dakota and whatnot. I believe we just played a home game set out there as well. Part of the trading and whatnot, trying to make it work in terms of getting out there and playing our home games on their ice. They've got the fans, but it's our home game, and so working that out with letting the GMs work that out, though, so that we can still take part and play our games, and not be because we don't have fans right now for the most part. 100 people or so down there, but we have played in arenas with those crowds. Yes.
And follow, if I may, to that.
Go ahead.
The size of those arenas, are they similar in size to Sports Center, smaller, larger? What would your estimated?
I would say similar in size. I think capacity's in that 2,000 to 3,000 range for crowd size. Most of our, I think our league requirements are for arenas of 1,500 or more at the minimum. So most of the arenas are in that 2,000 to 5,000 range in terms of capacity. I believe the sports center is, I'm not even, actually, is it 3,000, something like that? Yeah. So, from that perspective, I would just say, when I know that the Ice Dogs are hoping this passes soon here, where they're going to have the ability to have 50% attendance. I believe their attendance cap is right around that 21 or 2,200 mark. So that's going to give them the ability to put 1,000 or more fans in at 50%. And that arena, just by local comparisons, if you haven't been up to the Big Dipper, in terms of overall square footage, cubic feet and whatnot, I got to think it's half the size of the Sports Center in terms of overall space. It's a very tight bowl, very nice setup for junior hockey, but a bowl setting with seats all the way wrapped around the arena and whatnot. So and again, I always tell our own fans and our own players, we're not Fairbanks and they're not us, but just as a local comparison. That's probably the best analogy I could make.
Thank you. One last question from me. Obviously, there's a financial component to operating a hockey club. Was there any availability for CARES funds, PPP, anything? I know you guys are a nonprofit. Was that available to anybody in your hockey league, to your organization in particular, or was that not available to you guys?
Our league has taken advantage of some of that to keep administrative costs and whatnot down, and it's also been available to us as well, and we've taken advantage of some of that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions from the council? Seeing none, one comment, last comment, I urge your support on this. I think it's good, will be good for the community. I think it's something that we need right now. So, thank you. Call for the roll.
Councilmember, sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite ready to vote on this. I was hoping, we were just through public testimony, I was hoping we could have some discussion, if that's appropriate.
Well, I asked for, okay, go ahead. Is there any more comment?
Well, I did. I had actually some questions for Andrew, if we had an opportunity to do that.
Go ahead.
Thank you. At our last meeting, when we discussed our sports center mitigation protocols, I remember a comment being that with social distancing, the capacity of the sports center being under 400 people, so 311, I think was the exact number. And I noticed in this proposal, the Section 5, I think it was, asking for social distancing to be maintained. I'm not certain if we can speak to or discuss the plan for how spectators shall practice social distancing, maintaining physical distance of at least 6 feet from other people or not from their household, in the current setup that we have there if we have 750 people in the building. And I don't know if that's something you can speak to, Andrew, or others.
I can blather about it a little bit. I mean, nothing, there's, there are a lot of unknowns. One of the things that's been incorporated in some of the rinks across the country is the concept of podding. Some places have gone to the extreme of having identified numerical pods where the pre-sold tickets are sold for a particular space. You got a family of 5, and so they're not going to take up 30 feet, lineal feet of the bleacher space. They'll take up maybe 12, and then still end up with 6 feet between the various groups. That's one technique that's gone. And you're going to have that naturally anyway when you go to see the average party that attends is probably 2.5 to 3 people. So you have some economy of space there where each spot, if we went in there right now and everybody sat on one dot, take up a lot of space. But if you and your family came and there's 5 of you, that's one dot, maybe 2, and you end up with a 40% savings in terms of space. Other areas in terms of keeping people somewhat a little more stationary in that, whether or not we've talked with the Bears about beer sales or even concession sales in the stands where there's one person mask going through, and So I don't have to go up and stand in the beer line, I don't have to go up and stand in the pretzel line and those type of things. Some of the other techniques to make use of the 43,000 square feet is also, when we start talking about walking paths to bring in porta potties, so we have a segregation of crowd controls. Even if we have enough bottom spaces in the bleachers area, we still, the nature of most facilities is still everybody's crowded in the front lobby, everybody's crowded to the bathroom. But there are some ways through porta potties that we've already been, and Nate can attest to this, we get beat up with requests for porta potties out the back. In terms of those things. So even though we're at the 312, the 311 is everybody sitting alone, everybody doing the Bernie Sanders meme, I guess, if you would, without mittens and somewhere in the mittens, but everybody's sitting on one dot. So you get some economy of scale. If you came and asked me about if we went to 50%, as Fairbanks is shooting for, I'd have to scratch my head and do some more creative stuff. 750 or 25, less than 25% with egress, ingress controls, pre-sales of tickets. I believe once one or two people get turned away, being number 751 and 752, I think the second weekend they play, you'll see a huge increase in the pre-sales. So that's a nature that's not characteristic of the peninsula for the most part. We live on the peninsula, so we can go to what we want when we want at our leisure, and not have to be turned away. So there's going to be some natural separations in terms of that. What we're seeing during the high school activities and the other activities, we're seeing a lot of very elevated cooperation with the public, wearing the mask and separating. At one point we had the locker rooms closed, and so people got used to changing the small kids in the front lobby. And finally, the other day, we just had to take the chairs away because even though we had the locker rooms open, everybody was still changing in the front lobby. So we're getting a pretty, very cooperative public. So therefore, even though if everybody was sitting independent, 312, but when you put in the potting, you can just about double the capacity and still have a similar spacing without any other efforts.
Follow-up, Mr. Rupert?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought maybe people would have more questions on this. My only other question on the ordinance itself or resolution is in regards to one of the whereas requesting approval to operate a beer garden during games, but that's not mentioned in any of the sections at all about how that. I know what beer gardens are like. Is there any thought to how this is going to happen, I guess?
From an operations standpoint, we work closely with user groups as well as the ABC. Normally, when you see a section partitioned off within the sports center location or segregated area, it's actually at the building's administration's direction. It says, Nate, I want you here and here. This is separate. ABC, they essentially could sell beer in the entirety of the facility if they so chose. Again, that comes with some of the mechanics, such as we'll already have. Traditionally, everybody sits on the east side of the building, and then a spattering of people go to the other side. So that, and the Bears have run beer set services over there, but the small numbers of people that are over there, they use it. It's just not as much. So some of those things to attenuate grouping, waiting in lines and stuff are the 2 beer sale instead of 1. A split crowd, which would then spread it, as well as some volunteers from the Bears to go through the crowd and actually sell. So so that one person is circulating with a mask, of course, and they can then people don't go up and stand in line and worry about the dots. We have dots everywhere, but subconsciously you see them. Sometimes you stand on them, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you look at the arrow in Safeway and you turn around and go back the other way to the other aisle. But some of those mechanics, and we've done that. We've seen that happen before when the people, if they have some kind of a service, people don't get up and mingle as much. They'll wander out to the porta potty or the bathroom and come back. So, and the reason it was included specifically in there is as we step out of the high and the high intermediate levels and back into somewhat where there's some normalcy shining at the end of the tunnel. It's kind of a precursor where the council had established no beer gardens through the Music in the Park when we were dealing with that last spring. So rather than try to slide that through and just go, oh, we didn't forget about it. We put it out there and said, look, this is something that's been addressed by the council, and this is a facet. It's also a very key facet to some of the Bears' financial picture. It's a big picture in terms of those on the profit margins and those type of things. But with the spread out, the crowds actually split and some different avenues for egress and divestment and different paths, and as well as some in bleacher service. I think we're okay. I'll be perfect, but I think we'll get close.
I guess just from my perspective, and I'll be done. I think we're obviously winning a battle on the COVID front, but I do think there's still some very good reasons to be very cautious and use best efforts at mitigation within our city facilities. We're not that far away from our hospitals being at capacity, from really making some very difficult decisions. And our sports center was closed not that long ago, and I think we're blessed to be where we're at right now. And I feel it's necessary to remember that at this moment, we've still only vaccinated 50% of the seniors in our Kenai Peninsula Borough. And although that's a great accomplishment, it's still a lot of effort that's needed, and it's not going to be a long time. And although I want people to come home and I want things to happen, I still feel like it's prudent to give some time for this effort to continue. Particularly, I still see this every day. COVID is here. It's lower than it was. But when we start putting people into buildings, knowing that there's an opportunity for these things to start to creep back up again, especially here at the end, I'm very hesitant to support large numbers of people gathering in what amounts to a very difficult situation to ensure that mitigation efforts are happening. So I honestly, I'm torn tonight, and I feel like it's a difficult position to be in to support knowing what could happen in a situation that we're presented with here. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you, Andrew, for answering those.
Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you. This is Mr. Mayor, if I might ask Andrew another question. So we have reopened the sports center to 250 capacity. There's been hockey tournaments in high school. Do we know of any reported cases of COVID as a result of any of the activities that have gone on at the sports center?
No, and we had approximately 500 at our movie night at the lake that went over really well, and we haven't seen any spikes or had anything brought back that were directed back towards that related to that. I think Justin and the folks are getting them all shot and inoculated, so nobody's going to get it anymore because Justin's working on it. No, we don't have any spikes. We haven't had anything tagged back or traced back to us. And the teams, Hockey Club of Alaska, Soul High, and KPHA were pretty good about doing the contact tracing, logs for and attendance records for the teams and those type of things.
Thank you.
Any other discussion from the council? Ms. Queen, go ahead.
Just wanted to add one thing that I noted about the wording that I would have done differently prior to submitting it, but we carried forward this language in Section 3 about masks from the previous council-adopted resolution that says that masks, all persons entering the building are required to wear masks at all times. And I would suggest a potential amendment that would read, are required to wear masks at all times except while eating and drinking if concessions in the beer garden are going to be approved as part of this concept, which it was proposed as part of this concept. I think operationally, that's something I've seen at resort properties and things, is that they can still require them except when you're actively eating or drinking. And I would suggest that might be appropriate language to insert in Section 3 if moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Queen. Ms. Pamela Parker.
Thank you. I do support the increase to $750 for the sports center. I think we've been doing this long enough that we've got a lot of creative ways to do it safely. My only concern would be folks that choose not to wear masks when they come to the sports center and how that might be enforced. If it would be the Brown Bears staff responsibility, the sports center staff responsibility to turn those folks away, to find them in their seats. Because if we are going to get this large group of people together, I do see Justin's concern about the potential spread from these events. I do think we can do it in a safe manner, but I just would appreciate some clarification on whose responsibility that would be to make sure that it's remaining safe after, 14 games from now, people could get a little lax with their protocols. So if anyone has a change of thought.
Go ahead, Mr. Carmack.
Operationally and contractually, the Bears are responsible for their security. We've had very few instances of challenges with that. The masks, we did with the public. I did with the public, not as much as my staff, but a lot. But people are probably even the ones folks that are anti-masking. They've come around a long ways, and we find that people are like, okay, and they'll cooperate. Beyond that, the staff with the Bears has handled it pretty well in terms of those things, and but it would fall on them, and then our staff as backup. But in all honesty, the city's portion, if it gets to a point where our staff has to get into it or get in the middle of it, those type of things, our staff calls the SPD, and they intervene on our behalf, so our staff isn't in the middle of the melees or those type of things. So, but as far as that goes, security is responsible of the Brown Bears.
Okay, thank you. And follow-up question, if
Sure,
I
go
may. I didn't see, and I might be missing it, is there a minimum age where we wouldn't be requiring masks? I know typically there are certain young children that don't have to wear them. Is that something that we would be including as well?
Would, per CDC guidelines, those ages would be put in, but for the most part, until we get down into little ones, that we would be looking, I would guess we'd be looking for masks in terms of those things, based upon what the state and CDC recommends, would be the thresholds or metrics that would be employed there.
Okay. And is that listed in here? And again, I apologize, I might have just missed where that specific
Mr. Mayor, can I
item would be.
comment?
Go ahead, Ms. Queen.
Thank you. Yeah, the language of the Section 3 is actually the currently adopted policy already by the council. So this language hasn't changed from what's currently in place that was adopted at the January meeting, which references all persons entering the building. And then I think we would interpret that broadly, knowing that there are always going to be very few exceptions to that. Infants, people the CDC doesn't recommend people wearing masks, including people with some developmental disabilities or someone who can't safely remove it themselves. But this language hasn't changed, and so this reflects the current policy that's in place regarding masking.
Okay,
have a
thank you.
follow-up? Ms. Parker? Did you have a follow-up?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you. No, I'm good. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Mr. Chilson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm excited to see our Brown Bears get back to town and start playing again. And I think given the numbers that we've been seeing in the community as they continue to decrease, the mitigation measures, and one of the things that I find reassuring about this is the language where we're monitoring the average rolling case count per 14-day period. And there is the ability for this to roll back should we find ourselves back in a situation like November where cases are skyrocketing and we do have the mask requirement. That said, I do have some concerns also about the beer garden and distribution of food and the congregation of people. Like Councilman Rufford said, the moment you introduce a beer garden into a place, no matter what rules or expectations you have, the crowd behavior, that dynamic is just going to change and people are going to be congregating. I don't know if you can really change that. So that is concerning to me. I know there was the idea of amending the mask requirement with an exception for food and water. I'm not sure how we'd handle this, but I think one concern that we would have to address is, I've heard that this has been an issue at large public gatherings elsewhere, where the moment you have an exception for eating and drinking, someone just carries a water bottle around with them, or what's to stop someone from keeping a beer or a water bottle at the bottom of their feet and just saying, well, I'm drinking this and taking a sip every 10 minutes, and then they could just not wear their mask the entire event. So I think we'd have to consider that carefully. And I'm not sure if we were to maybe just amend this to remove the ability to have the beer garden or food distribution there so we can still get the games going, we can get people in there, have that community offering happening again, but maybe just mitigate that risk quite significantly. Would that still be viable for the Brown Bears? Or I don't know how much of a portion of their revenue that would be. I'm sure it's notable, but would it be viable?
750 is, as Nate indicated, 976 they struggle at. 750 is definitely an albatross. If we remove the beer section, I think I can speak for Nate, is that's a hit. That's a hit. Because that's a profit. They don't that they run that as their business. That might be a game changer. So that could so if you don't have beer at 750, you're down to about 450 or 5 equivalent, or versus now do you put 1,200 in to compensate for the no beer in your.
So as it's structured right now, when you say beer garden, is that like a actual sectioned off area, kind of like a Music at the Park, where people are tightly congregated, and that's only the only area where they're able to drink? Or could we maybe modify this and still allow beer and food concessions, but you get it and you go back to your seats and you sit down? You're not sitting in a crowd or standing in a crowd in a little area.
Correct. Half of the arena is where beer is allowed. So they have it's 400. If in a normal seating sense, there's room for 400 on the west side in that section of bleachers, and then room for about another 1,200, 1,400 on the other side, and then up along the rails, which will have some space.
Got it. So the beer garden is really referring to a section of bleachers where beer is permissible. So the social distancing rules would still apply. You get your beer, you still have to maintain 6 feet of distance.
Correct.
There's no congregation.
Correct. It's not. The one they would go. They're like I said. We would have 2 beer sections, 2 beer service lines. So you don't have the lines. That cuts down on the congregation. If you noticed at the Music in the Park, and then somebody went through the stand and then sold beer, so that they're not even getting up, so they're staying in their pods and going to that site. In terms of the beer garden term, it's kind of a beer service area, almost a generic term, so for beer and alcohol service. But as it is now, they get up, go get it, and come back. And some of those measures I mentioned on the secondary stations, as well as possibly sales or waiters hawking in the crowd, all are engineered to minimize the going up and moving around and being around different people when you need a beer versus the 5 people you came with.
Okay.
Do you have a follow-up, Mr. Chilson?
No, that answers my question. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Parker.
I would propose an amendment to Section 3. And it would be, all persons entering the building are required to wear masks at all times, except when eating or drinking, period. Athletes and officials are not required to wear masks when they are on the ice, period. And then the remainder stays the same.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Discussion? Seeing no discussion, we'll vote on the amendment. Madam Clerk, could you repeat the amendment?
Section 3 will read, all persons entering the building are required to wear masks at all times except when eating and drinking. Period. Athletes and officials, when they are on the ice, I'm sorry, Ms. Parker, are not required to wear masks?
Yes.
Correct. Coaches must wear masks at all times, even when on the ice. By definition, on the ice includes penalty benches and team benches.
Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Pamela Parker?
Yes.
Carey?
Yes.
Chilson?
Yes.
Lisa Parker?
Yes.
Hutchings?
Yes.
Ruffridge?
Yes.
You have 6 yes votes.
The amendment passes 6-0. Mr. Ruffridge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question. Actually, I have a couple of amendments as well, but I wanted to ask a question first. The ability of administration and/or staff to determine whether or not, if mitigation practices are not currently being followed, if the Brown Bears are playing and they're in charge, what what ability do you have to terminate an agreement if you think it would be necessary? And should we add language in this section to make that be a possibility?
All our agreements have that exculpatory basis to where we can ultimately say, it's my house. I know you're renting it as an Airbnb, but this is my house, you gotta go. At which point we work with the Bears to either have cleave out or call some of the challenging individuals that may want to attend and not cooperate and go from there. But ultimately, we always have the reside in all our agreements. We have the final say, whether it's me or Joel or our staff on hand or our city manager or those type of things. We never give away the farm. We can always. And there were years and years ago, there was some incident where stuff got bad and we turned off some of the lights and cut the game short just because it was not where we wanted the facility to be. So we do have that ability.
Sorry, I have so many questions. So when you're talking about the east and west side for seating, and you talk about people typically sitting only on, or they try to sit on the east side typically, I thought I heard you say there was a proposal to sort of make sure that people split and sit equally on each side. Is that correct?
We'll have each of those areas designated with their capacities, and if you put me in there, I can tell you how many's in the whole building within about 100. But we'll have some indicators and get some markers and establish those levels, and then we'll just have to start shunting people over to other sections. Say this section is getting full, you need to go sit on the other section. People tend to hit the permanent side where they always sit, and then the ones down below, and not so much on the far folded side. So that the folded side is the west side.
And beer sales, just so I'm clear, can happen in the entire arena.
They are restricted per. I'll be honest, but they're restricted when Nate and the Bears got their liquor license. We came to a mutual agreement, but I pushed really heavy. Said, we're not going to do this in the whole building. We need to do it on half. And originally we started out with half the east side of permanent bleachers on that side as well as folding, and then we expanded that into the other half. So it's just half because there is a segregation. There's a large contingency of people that don't want to be around the people drinking beer. So we respect that and carry it forth.
So I wanted to go back to a couple of your other comments earlier. I want to be respectful. If they're coming here to play, you had said potentially if it was 1,000 spectators, you would be worried about social distancing or mitigation in general. So in your opinion, you could not put 500 on one side and 500 on the other?
I'd rather not.
Okay.
Just because I joke that we're trying to find the legal length or the safe length of a unicorn horn here. You know, I joke about that, and it's a challenge. Depend upon where the community's comfort's at, and we're not exactly sure about that. You know, this is real. Whether I agree with it, or Bob agrees with it, or Fred agrees with it, but to Joe over here, it's real. So, in terms of those things, 1,000 right out of the gate, that it can be done. But I think a jump from 250 to 750 is a nice jump. And then, because right now we're at about 86 or about 72% at the 750. It comes up to 72 of the building's capacity. So, or 22% or in that range. So we're still below like the restaurants in Anchorage and stuff. I don't want to make a huge jump. I mean, I've been termed some things on Facebook and everything for having recommended to close the rink before. So I'm not reeling from that. I'm not straining from that. But at the same token, I think this is a good jump. 1,600 would make me a little bit nervous unless we were at the very low, the very bottom of the things. We're challenged in this area because of our small population. You know, if we have 5 cases against our population, that's a different statistic. So that's a significant statistic on ours versus 5 people in Anchorage or say 5 people in Fairbanks. So it's a little bit different mechanics there. So I'd say, work our way to that 1,000. If the numbers are through the floor and we're headed into playoffs, then you may see Nate come back and say, hey, we got it going on. Can we expand that? But right now, let's work to, and in terms of those, so to work our way there and see if we have any spikes that are traceable, and if they're not, then they're not traceable, then we know where we're at.
Yeah, I think that was the purpose behind my question was rather than, and maybe I'm just tired of hearing sports center resolutions, but it seems like if we're going to put a section 6 in there that says if such and such happens, then we go to 250 people, in your estimation, would it be wise to say if we reduce even further, because that's a possibility as well, that there's an allowance for a greater capacity without continuing to come back for new protocols?
That would be at the council's prerogative. I mean, that's always inferred with, for which we hope. We heard from the other stuff. So yeah, I mean, if we find ourselves at the bottom, if we had a metric, a trigger, and that's been something that's evaded us when we start talking about a metric that says or an algorithm that says if we're at 7, what does that mean? If we're at 3, then what? So if there was an algorithm to work by that, where Steph, city manager, and the rest of us on administrative and the Bears could work together and say, okay, we got 0 for the last 14 days. Are we going to go to 3,500? I don't know. That's the council. These are tough decisions, and I know you folks. I mentioned being referenced interestingly on Facebook, but I know you all have too. So it's a challenging decisions we're trying to do. So joke about it, but yeah, there could be something like that in there, or either that or autonomy. Where at a certain point then. It could be the administration's call or something. I don't know. I'm not sure with what we'd all be comfortable with.
Thank you. I would like to move an amendment, if you don't mind, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
Either adding to section 6 or starting a new section about community risk level, that should the number of COVID-19 cases in the Central Kenai Peninsula be reduced to an average daily case rate of less than 3 per 100,000 population over a 14-day period, the spectator capacity allowed at any ICE event at SRSC shall be increased at the discretion of the Parks and Rec Director and the administration.
Do I have a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Cholson. Discussion. You want to
I
add
have a
anything to that,
question.
Mr. Rufford?
I don't. Thank you, though.
Ms.
The
Hutchins?
question I have is, how are these players being tested now? Because now that we don't have a declaration from our governor, people can come into the state without testing. So do the Brown Bears test for their own protection?
Yes, we do. So when they travel and coming in.
Mr. Keel, if you could step up to the microphone.
I'll grab that one, I guess. Maybe we'll sit up here and cuddle.
Yes, they would be tested on their initial report into Alaska, not obviously when they hit town. So what we do is we would, just as when they left for Christmas break, for instance, went home for their families, came back, they all had to show a negative test result, just as you would when you were entering Alaska. Is that 48 hours or 72 hours? I can't recall. I think it was 72 for Alaska, wasn't it?
So just to be clear, that's a requirement that your team is enforcing now that the state is no longer doing it. You're carrying that requirement of your team members forward?
Yeah, our league and our team has an entire list of protocols on what we have to do with daily temperature checks and daily declarations, and every time they enter the arena or go to a different venue or whatnot. So we do that. We have quarantine procedures. If someone were to test positive, I believe we've only had 2 incidents the entire season, and it was in those occasions when they went home and then came back after traveling. And so then at that point, they didn't get to report to the team until after they had sat out through their quarantine and had gotten negative test results, and they were able to rejoin us.
Thank you.
Any other question from Mr. Keel? Going back to the motion, any other questions on the amendment? Mr. Carey?
Thank you. To the administration, does the city already have the authority to do what this motion would state?
Andrew, I'll take that one. Just through the mayor, I would say no. Early on, we made a lot of decisions reacting to very quickly changing circumstances. But I think in December, we kind of transitioned decision-making at the sports center so that the council started setting some of those specifics by resolution. So it is true, I agree with Andrew, at some point soon, we are kind of giving ourselves an exit path so that we can return to a place where on a just department level or administrative level, we're going to make decisions involving the operations of the facility. But if there were a current resolution in place that said the capacity is X as adopted by the council, then no, we're not going to amend that administratively without a conversation with the council. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, call for the roll on the amendment.
Councilmember Pamela Parker,
Yes.
Carey,
Yes.
Chilson,
Yes.
Lisa Parker,
Yes.
Hutchings,
Yes.
Ruffridge.
Yes.
You have 6 yes votes.
The amendment passed 6-0. Any further discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, we'll call for the roll on the amended resolution 2021-009.
Councilmember Pamela Parker,
Yes.
Carey,
Yes.
Chilson,
Yes.
Lisa Parker,
Yes.
Hutchings,
Yes.
Ruffridge.
Yes.
You have 6 yes votes.
Resolution 2021-009, updating the Soldotna Regional Sports Complex, passed on a 6-0 vote. Thank you. Moving on to the next item on our agenda would be mayor and council reports. My report will be very short. I thank everyone for passing that resolution. I think it'll be a help to the community, start getting back to a somewhat normal situation. I think we need it right now. It's been a long winter, been a long year, so thank you for doing that. And that is all I have. So we move on to council reports on boards and commissions. Soldotna Chamber of Commerce Board meeting, Mr. Chilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors met on February 12th. As far as ongoings of that meeting, right now the Chamber is continuing to collaborate closely with community and business stakeholders to explore really what our tourism season is going to look like this summer. As you know, the recent changes of the cruise season are going to have a pretty heavy impact, and also the recent expiration of the health mandates leave a lot of uncertainty as far as how that tourism season is going to pan out, and has a lot of effects potentially. So just trying to work through that process. Additionally, plans are continuing forward for Music in the Park. We're really optimistic that's going to move forward. There's a close working relationship between the Chamber and the city as far as how that can happen. Levitt is still on board with allowing us to use the funds that we were previously awarded last year, this year, should we be able to make that work out. Additionally, as the last reported, the Chamber, in partnership with the Kenai Chamber, resumed in-person joint luncheons in Kenai last month, and they are now moving forward with in-person chamber luncheons at the Sports Center again starting in April. So stay tuned for announcements on that. Additionally, they finalized their budget for the upcoming year. And that's really all I have to report on. I think the majority of the other items have been reported on in the the most recent quarterly report by Shannon to the council. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Chilson. Next report will be Kenai River Special Management Area Board meeting. Mr. Carmichael, and I just saw him leave through the door. So we'll move on to Kenai Peninsula Economic Development District Board meeting. Mr. Zarneski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Dillon, I think, covered most of it. We did meet last week, Thursday, and in addition to him announcing the new website and many of the things he went over today, a couple minor things that were action that was taken. One was an adopted policy confirming their longstanding past practice of the staff not engaging in any kind of political functions, fundraiser, or other political events. And so this adoption of this policy just confirmed their past practice. The other thing I think that's worth reporting is that Tim and his staff continue to assist on CARES Act appeals. Apparently there's been a fair number of folks who have applied for funds and either didn't get them or didn't get the dollar figure that they had hoped to receive, and he's been assisting in that process. And that is the end of the report.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Zarneski? Seeing none, thank you. We'll move on to item 10, City Manager's Report. Ms. Queen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple items here to report. One is we are going to use approximately $6,000 from the Utility Contingency Fund to issue a repair on some thaw wire on the water and sewer lines that cross under the bridge. So we discovered recently at our lift station that there were some heat trace repairs that needed to be done that weren't budgeted for. And we're going to go ahead and use $6,000 from the Utility Fund's Contingency Fund. That fund is $30,000 to start with, so just a small percentage of that fund that I wanted to notify you about. In terms of snow haul budget, we're probably going to dip into contingency as well, which is not unnormal in a snowy year like the one we had. Several years ago, that piece of the operating budget, instead of keeping it big every year, was made smaller, knowing that if we get a big, heavy snow year, we can dip into contingency. We have not done that yet, but we've got about $454 left in the truck hauling, but that was on Monday, so I'm sure we're there. We're looking okay on the pit hauling budget, but the truck hauling, that's originally a $50,000 PO, and we're right at that limit right now. So we're going to continue hauling the snow, and I'll be back to report when we do have to use some contingency funds for those efforts. This is really neat, I think, brought to us by the police chief. We've got 17 Motorola XTS 5000 radios that are no longer needed by our police department because they've been replaced with newer radios. So they're somewhat obsolete for us and our needs. The chief, when we have equipment or furniture or assets that are no longer needed by a certain department, we first ask any other department if they have a city need for those. In this case, there was not a city need for those radios. So I approved the chief's request to donate those to the Chickaloon Community Volunteer Fire Department. So they're going to be getting those 17 radios, and those will assist them be able to work really well for them. So I'm glad the chief made that connection and we're able to do that. Lastly, just want to report, Kyle Cornelis had been coordinating with Senator Murchicky's office about the process this year for inputting capital projects into the state CAPSIS system. And if you recall, the council adopts a legislative priority list every year. It comes from our other capital project lists, and really it hasn't changed much at all the last several years. This year we were unsure about the deadline for getting those projects input, and I had a conversation with the mayor and requested that we be authorized to just go ahead and input those same projects that the council adopted last year, rather than bring that forward. So we've done that, and I will follow up tomorrow and get you a copy of that list as we're presenting it. The only change to it was we deleted the one item which was funded by the council through our general fund, and those were the Soldotna SPD patrol vehicle cameras. Other than that, all the other projects remain the same. I think Kyle probably got those input in CAPSIS earlier this week. As always, the last 4 years, I think we're not hopeful for any funding, but we do think it shows continuity of priority for city needs and keeping them kind of on our own priority lists, as well as the list of priorities that are communicated to our delegation in Juneau. And I think that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Are there any questions for the city manager? Mr. Chilson.
Just a quick question. I've always been curious about this, but can you elaborate on how the billing structure is for our contract snow haulers? Do they get paid per load of snow, or do we just have a flat contract for removal service during the winter season? Just on the heavy snowfall days, and I see them running all day long, I've always been curious as far as how that billing works.
Thank you, Mr. Chilson. Yeah, I don't know the answer, but Kyle looks like he knows the answer.
Yeah, it's a good question. We competitively bid based on hauling. So the size of, you'll notice there's different end dump sizes. So the amount of snow each carrier can carry is different. So there's one contractor that has the contract, and then he subcontracts to other haulers. So, but we pay based on the truckloads. So there's a couple of different entities. We pay the hauler who follows behind or adjacent to our snow blower, and then hauls it to a pit. So we have a contract with the pit, who is snow storage. Ms. Queen noted that that budget is doing okay at this moment, but the pit receives the snow, and then there's an operator and a piece of equipment that pushes it into a pile and does it over there. So we do strategically, you'll notice that sometimes the berms remain in the center line of the road for longer than other times. I suspect that they'll remain for the better part of this week, as one of the reasons our snow hauling budget and snow removal budget is exceeding our allocation this year is because it's not particularly huge snowfalls, but subsequent, 4 inches here, 3 inches there, 2 inches there. And so we'll do we've cleaned the mains, this year, or today and yesterday, and it's snowing right now, and we're gonna have to do those again. But it'll remain in the center line until we think that we've had a break and caught up, and then we'll pay for the haulers to do it. And we try to, strategize when we call out the snow hauling contract, when we're able to catch up, so.
And then 2 follow-up questions. Our snow removal mechanism, as far as I know, it's basically been that way as far back as I can remember. But is there any reason that we don't just push it to the side of the streets like Kenai does? And if we were to do that, how much would we be saving? I mean, what is our annual snow removal spend?
I don't have the average numbers. Stephanie might be able to answer that. But as far as the operations go, we have a somewhat more urban environment with pedestrian facilities, and so when we do push snow into berms on a lot of streets that allow us to do it. Mostly small neighborhood local streets. We'll do that. But a lot of times we're clearing sidewalks and pushing that into the middle, and then bringing everything into the middle. So we do leave it in the right of way, and then we have to come back and wing that back periodically, because it just narrows and narrows. So the main collectors, we don't really have any arterials, but our arterials and main collectors, we do bring it to the middle.
Got it. I didn't know if maybe a compromise to that approach that might have been considered at one point is with your right-of-ways that have pedestrian walkways on either side, maybe designating one for pedestrian use, keeping that clear, and then making the other side snow storage and pushing it to there.
That's an option in some places. One challenge is it adds up so quick, and then does get icy. Sure. And we do have it's called a trackless with a snowblower. You see it on the on the highways, and that will also, instead of winging back where we can't do that with the graders, we'll use that to blow it back. You'll see that mostly in the residential, rural residential neighborhoods.
Okay.
Kyle, just a couple things to add to your question. I think some of it's a function of, and you kind of said this, the right-of-way width itself. There are many places in town where public property stops maybe a foot or 2 foot behind the back of the sidewalk, and then it's private property, and we wouldn't want to be pushing snow onto private property. And I think it's a bit of a quality of life issue for people in the spring as well. It's fairly nice not to have a very tall berm that has to melt in your yard compared to the snow being hauled away. But it's also something that's, in terms of site triangles, I'm sure there's a couple places in town that I drive normally where, the property owner pushes the snow in a certain distance and it makes it hard. You have to kind of creep out to get that site distance. So hauling it away has some advantages. I don't know that the city's done kind of a comparative analysis, but I think it's, in some instances, it probably wouldn't be feasible just to the narrowness of the right-of-way. There's not extra land.
So is it a legal restriction that we're not allowed to push it onto people's private property? Or is it just kind of, we're being polite and it's best practice? Because I know, for example, I live at the back of a cul-de-sac and I get a mountain of snow on my lawn and it's just there.
Yeah.
Cul-de-sacs are difficult, especially the narrow ones.
Yeah. And in the rural residential areas, typically you're going to see about 13 feet from top back of curb to the property line. So a lot of those areas there is room, especially in the residential. When you get into the wider collector streets and sidewalks, there may be less room. So for best practices and I would say risk management, we wouldn't want to place snow on private property, and certainly some legal.
Okay.
implications as
I'm
well.
not complaining. I don't mind it on my property. I was just curious if
It
there
is
was
a,
any
it's a,
sort of
it's a,
restriction.
it's a judgment call of quality of life in our area. I think we
Mm-hmm.
could probably reduce some spending and strategically leave some snow some places. And perhaps it's probably time we can look at that, and we do periodically, but it's like sanding too. We could always add more sand, and it would be a better traction. But then we got to buy more sand and spend more time putting it out, and then every bit we put down, we get to bring it back up, so.
Yeah. Well, I understand it's a difficult balance. I appreciate you exploring that, and I don't mean to derail the meeting, so that's all I have. Thank you.
Let's talk snow.
Any other questions for Mr. Ruffridge?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick aside, I for some reason envisioned like a little jokester snow plower putting a mountain of snow in Jordan's front yard now. The meeting that we had regarding the remaining CARES funds, is there an update or a timeline on some of that stuff at all, or no?
Thank you, Mr. Ruffridge. I made 2 after-the-fact notes of things to remind you about, and I forgot both of them. One of them is we did meet and discussed with the smaller working group the remaining CARES Act funds, solicited some input. We've met several times since then, and our plan is to bring you the newest edition of the updated CARES Act spending plan at your next meeting. So on March 10th, we're going to bring that updated version of what we're proposing based on what we heard, and it'll be some fairly broad categories, again, fewer categories, but we've thought about some of these things in enough detail to maybe give you some of the specific breakdowns of the programs within those 3 categories. So that we'll have for you at your March 10th meeting. The other thing that was referenced is we've been having meetings with the Chamber and the Wednesday Market, and that coordination and planning is ongoing. And on March 10th, we also plan to bring you some action items related to the summer music in the park and Wednesday Market. So as it was referenced earlier, last summer, the council, the city had taken a position putting some broad restrictions over the park. We're working with those entities, and we'll bring that back to you at your next meeting to potentially approve the final plan for those events and undo some of those restrictions that were necessary and put in place last summer.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to public comments. A member of the public will have 3 minutes to comment. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to comment? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. I see no one in the chamber wishing to speak, and looking at the Zoom, I see no hands raised. So we'll move on to council comments. Ms. Pamela Parker.
All right. I just wanted to say that I apologize for not being at the last meeting. We had a bit of a family issue the day before that we were still dealing with on Wednesday, and then again, wasn't feeling well before this meeting. So it was kind of, February has been the longest short month of the year so far. So I apologize, and I do look forward to being back with y'all in person. And I'm also very excited to safely attend some Brown Bears games as far away from everyone else on the stands as I can possibly get with my mask on. So hope to see some of y'all there.
Thank you. Ms. Hutchings.
I would just like to say I'd love it to quit snowing. Yes, and Lisa, have a great vacation. And thanks, everybody.
Mr. Chilson.
No comments tonight, thank you.
Mr. Ruffridge.
No comments, thank you.
Mr. Carey.
Good meeting to all. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you. I just want to congratulate Quinn Cox on his performance at the Kenai Peninsula Borough Cross Country Ski Meet, which he won the men's division, and he will be competing in state. And so good luck, Quinn. I look forward to reading about you in the newspaper.
Good for him. Moving on to item 13, meeting announcements. March 3rd, 2021 is the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting at 5:30 p.m. here in the council chambers. March 10th, 2021, City Council Investment Work Session at 4:45 p.m. in the council chambers. And March 10th, 2021, city council meeting at 6 PM in the council chambers. Seeing no further business on the agenda, the meeting is adjourned.